Welcome to Drakewell Museum and Parks Winter Academy. My name is Sarah Goodman, and I'm the museum educator here at Drakewell Museum and Park. And I'm also the moderator for this evening's program. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with Drakewell, the museum is located in Titusville, Pennsylvania, and we are one of 24 historic sites owned by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and administrated by the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. We are also supported by our nonprofit organization, the Friends of Drakewell Incorporated. Drakewell preserves and interprets the site of the Drake Well, chronicling the birth and development of the petroleum industry in Pennsylvania and its growth into a global enterprise. We are pleased this evening to have join us Jennifer Ford, the Executive Director of the Butler County Historical Society, and she is going to help us shake off those winter blues with a presentation about William Smith, or as we affectionately call him here, Uncle Billy. Before we get started, I'm just going to review a few things again. We're going to go over some logistics. Just a reminder, we ask that you try to keep your cameras off. This helps everyone pay more attention to the speaker themselves. And we also ask that you keep your microphones muted. If you have to ask a question, down at the bottom of your screen, there is a chat button. You can type your question into the chat, or you can hold your questions until we pause for the question and answer sessions. Also, just remember that anything that you type in the comments, or I should say in the chat, will be recorded. All right, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenter this evening, Jennifer Ford, the Executive Director of the Butler County Historical Society. Sorry. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining us tonight, and looking forward to hearing all about William Smith. So I'll let you take over.
Thank you. Thanks for having me this evening, and thanks everybody for joining us. I will tell you what this talk will not be, and that is a talk about the technical aspects of Drakewell Museum and drilling for oil. I am a social historian, not a technical historian, and I'm pretty new to the Butler area. So I'm diving into William A. Smith, trying to find out who he was as a person. The talk will be in two basic sections. First, where and how Uncle Billy came to be where he was in 1859, what accidents of history put him there. And secondly, what life was like at Drakewell with his family, and what happened after Titusville. So we're going to try to figure out who he was as a man before and after the work at Drakewell. I suspect you all know the basic story. For those of you who don't, nobody on this earth summarizes better than the folks who script PHMC historical markers. So let's look at, and I'll read you Uncle Billy's historical marker. William A. Smith, known as Uncle Billy Smith, in 1859, he drilled the world's first successful oil well with tools that he made in his blacksmith shop near Tarentum. The well, 69.5 feet deep, was drilled near Titusville for Colonel Edwin Drake. Uncle Billy died in 1890. He lies buried about 120 feet southeast of here. In longer and shorter versions, that's pretty much what everybody knows about Uncle Billy and who he was and what his claim to fame is. We also are all familiar with this image of Uncle Billy. It is painted larger than life on the side of our carriage house, our storage building here at the Historical Society. So everybody knows this face. Everybody knows that's Uncle Billy, and that he drilled the well for Colonel Drake with tools that he made himself. But as a social historian, I get set to wondering, how did William Andrew Smith end up in northwestern Pennsylvania in the 19th century, and how did he acquire the specialized skill set that Drake needed to sink a percussion drill into the ground in hope of extracting oil in quantity? What small steps of history had to happen how many small steps of history had to happen to get Uncle Billy Smith where and when he was. Since his last name was Smith, is there a history of blacksmithing in his family? Is blacksmithing in his DNA? These are the questions that start rolling around in my brain. So, section 1, square 1. How did William Smith end up in Northwest Pennsylvania? Let's start with his family background, because the first question about why and when he came here has got to begin with his family. In the reconnaissance phase of research, I have been known to, and I did, take a shortcut to find Billy and Billy's parents so I can work my way up his family tree. Yes, I went to Ancestry.com. I love Ancestry.com. It gives you a good jumping off space. It always does. It's not to say where you go is accurate, but it's always a good place to start by giving you some names and dates. The easiest thing to do when you're looking for somebody is to, on Ancestry, is to once again cheat and go straight to family trees. The hope being that somebody else has been there before you and done the yeoman share of the work.
Yeah, you go ahead.
I'm sorry. Is everybody okay?
We are
Okay.
good.
Okay, all right. Assuming the research of the tree you check is solid, it can save you a lot of work. So it happens that William Andrew Uncle Billy Smith, 1812 to 1890, appears in no fewer than 67 family trees on Ancestry. I scrolled through them and picked the most promising, the most developed, the one that had the most links to primary documents, and dove in. And eureka, I found that Billy's father, Andrew Smith, was a blacksmith, born in Philadelphia just after his parents came to the US from Northern Ireland, Ulster, and he died in Winfield Township, Butler County. And the information on that site led me to links about Billy's dad, Andrew, serving in the War of 1812, which gave me a little pause. I'm starting to lose faith. To my delight, though, I discovered that he left his son, William Andrew Smith, a blacksmith, back on track, many of his worldly goods, including his stone house and valuable status items such as tea sets, looking glasses, rugs, carpets, decanters, tumblers, writing desks, and very fine clothes. This tells me we have a problem. I work with personal inventories. I've worked with thousands of them over the years, and I know when something's out of whack. That list of personal goods you would fully expect to find in a stone house near Philadelphia, not at a farmhouse in Winfield Township, Butler County, Pennsylvania. It just doesn't make sense. Winfield Township, Butler County, Pennsylvania, at that time was barely out of the frontier phase, just barely entering settlement phase. You would have had just a small number of chairs, maybe a table, and some basic farming tools, and maybe some smithing tools. Not with that Andrew Smith left his son, blacksmith William Andrew Smith, in his will. So back down the tree I go. Let's find another tree and start again. I found Billy's dad closer to home and found the real ancestry line. Now, here's a little bit of a dilemma. Tell me later, do you think I should contact the author of that original family tree and tell her Andrew is way off track from the actual Billy Smith line of ancestry? Of course, it shouldn't surprise anybody that that family tree and that Andrew Smith leads directly back to gentry in England and even some royalty. So I almost hate to tell them, but I feel like I should. Let me know what you think. Anyway, the father of our William Andrew Smith was indeed named Andrew Smith, but he came to Butler County from Ireland in 1792 when he was just a baby. And that's how his son, Uncle Billy, came to be born there 20 years later. I can't help myself. I have to wonder why and where and how did baby Andrew end up in Butler County? Well, his parents, Billy's grandparents, Jeremiah Smith and Sarah Davis Smith, are listed as being born in County Down, Ulster in 1750. Beep, 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 beep. Oh, that's the family tree that got conky wampus. I got carried away talking and didn't show you that, but this Andrew Smith is the one that goes back off the wrong direction. County Down, where Billy's grandparents are from, is in the northeastern section of Ireland. It's a gorgeous place. If you haven't been there, you really truly must go. This is obviously a painting, but pretty much what Northern Ireland looks like. So Billy's grandparents, Jeremiah and Sarah, married about 1770, and over the course of 22 years had 6 kids, 2 girls, 4 boys. The first one arrived in 1770, the last one in 1792. So there was a little bit of gap in there. All of the children except the last one were born in Ulster. About 1791 to Jeremiah, Sarah, 4 of their children, including baby Andrew, Billy's dad, took ship for America. It makes perfect sense. 1790s were a period of increased outmigration from Northern Ireland. Here we have to stop. We have to raise a glass, and we have to raise a glass to Uncle Billy's grandmother, Sarah Davis Smith. Here's what happened. At the age of 42, she left her home and her kin, crossed the Atlantic Ocean in a wooden ship, toting 3 kids and a nursing infant, landed in Philadelphia right before the yellow fever outbreak of 1793 killed many folks, then traveled by horseback over the mountains into the backcountry on foot, horseback, or wagon, and ended up in the backcountry in Butler County, building a lovely new home. And the icing on the cake, sometime either right before they left home or on the transatlantic journey, Jeremiah gifted Sarah with another pregnancy. So in 1792, the last of the Smith brood was born in America. Billy's uncle, John David Smith, was born in Winfield Township. So here's to Sarah Davis. In her 40s, she had the ability to do all of that while she was pregnant. So I suspect not only did she bring a good dash of Welsh blood to the Smith family tree, she brought some serious grit. If we think Uncle Billy was tough, I think we all ought to better raise a glass to his paternal grandmother, Sarah Smith, who managed to accomplish all that. If not for her, Billy Smith would not have been born at all, and Edward Drake might have been left up Titusville Creek without a driller, and you all would be working at the Brewer Well Museum. The Smiths were like many other families in Winfield Township, late 18th, early 19th centuries. They acquired land and set about the work of erecting a simple dwelling, probably a log house, more likely a log cabin, and there is a difference, then clearing the trees to create fields in which to grow crops or keep some livestock, a few sheep, maybe a cow. And parenthetically, right up the road from the Smiths, a few years later arrived the Cooper family, Now, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the Butler County Historical Society and the sites that we operate, but one of them is the Cooper Cabin in Winfield Township, Butler County. And they arrived circa 1815. And as it turns out, were neighbors to the Smiths. And indeed, Uncle Billy ended up marrying into that family. By the time the Coopers showed up in 1815, the Smiths had already been in Winfield for 20 years. Wee Andrew, who crossed the Atlantic as a baby, had now grown to manhood, married a woman named Abigail, and fathered 4 children: Mary, William Andrew, Uncle Billy, Rebecca, and John. So why a blacksmith? Uncle Billy's father, Andrew, isn't listed anywhere as a blacksmith. He farmed the land that his family claimed in 1792 and that he grew up on. The reality was, in the 1810s, 20s, 30s, when you're in the backcountry, very, very few skilled craftsmen were able to ply their trade full time outside of cities or small market towns, certainly not out in rural areas. You couldn't run up the road and find a skilled craftsman. So most farmers also had a skill such as blacksmith, cooper, carpenter, cobbler, and everybody went to neighboring farms and their neighbors to acquire services. And it was very much a barter economy. Usually you died owing money for services to all of your neighbors. So it's entirely possible, although I have not yet verified it, that Billy's father, Andrew, did double as farmer blacksmith. Whatever the reasons were, Andrew did apprentice young Billy to a blacksmith when the boy was only 10 years old. It sounds pretty awful to us, apprenticing your 10-year-old son to a blacksmith. Kids really did grow up faster then. In the next section, we'll take a look at Billy as a blacksmith and what his life was like at Drakewell, and what happened after Titusville. Does anybody have any questions about this first up the genealogy tree section?
I do not see any questions in the chat. If anyone has a question, they can turn on their camera and turn on their mic and ask Jennifer directly. So I'll give everyone a moment to kind of ponder and think if they have a question for Jennifer or not. Oh, we do have a question. We have a question. It says, what is Billy's father Andrew's middle just disappeared, middle name and the years of his birth and death?
Okay. Andrew was born in 1792, died 1834.
And do you know his
middle name I have not yet come across. Everywhere I've seen him listed, it's simply Andrew Smith. I'm sure he did have a middle name. Most folks did, quite often the mother's maiden name, but I have not yet found. Does anybody else know? Well, if anybody finds out, be sure to let us know.
Might tax records for Butler give some indication as to their wealth or what Andrew might have owned?
Andrew, probably yes. I'll be honest with you. That's exactly the kind of path that I would tend to go down on. That's a lead I would love to follow, but I was strict with myself and made myself stick with Billy and what he got up to. I would love to, and in fact, I would strongly recommend that somebody, if they haven't already, do a full personal history of Billy Smith and his family. They're a relatively fascinating bunch, but for purposes of this talk, I didn't allow myself to go down that road.
Well, that's if the tax records even exist.
Right, and I would actually more likely be inclined not just to look at tax records, but at personal inventories. And if I had the time, I probably would have seen if there is on file and hopefully digitally the administration papers for Andrew Smith's, after Andrew Smith's death, his will, his personal inventory, his vendu sale, because that's when you really sink down into the nitty gritty of what people owned, everything from their land right down to their chamber pots. Tax records are good for giving you a general sense of things, and to be honest, I discovered when I was cross-referencing, many years ago, I was cross-referencing 1798 federal direct tax census records with personal inventory records with local tax records, which usually are taxing the land. And this is what caught my attention. Livestock, how many horses you have, you're taxed for horses, cattle, etc. And I found it very, very interesting as I was cross-referencing those sources that for men who died not too long after the tax assessor came around and therefore had their personal inventory published, when the tax assessor came around, somehow they only managed to have 2 or 3 head of cattle, a couple head of sheep, and maybe 1 horse. When they died shortly thereafter, and the neighbors went to do a full inventory of their farms, somehow they ended up with a couple dozen cows and pigs and horses. So I had to wonder, although I'll never be able to prove, did somebody sneak the livestock over the hill or into the woods when the tax assessor was coming? Then after he left, somehow they came back to the farm. I don't
That's
know.
true. That's true for Erie County.
Yeah, I was working in Westmoreland, and I suspect that was the case too. How can you blame anybody? People have been cheating on taxes for millennia. Anything else? Okay,
I do not see any more questions, so
all righty.
let's continue on.
Then let's flip back to where we left the story with young, I'm sorry, I have to call him Billy. I feel so familiar with him at this point. He might not have liked people calling him Billy when he was alive, but you had to do Uncle Billy. But let me catch up with myself here. Okay, so young Billy was apprenticed to a blacksmith when he was about 10 years old. He spent his early teens learning the art and science of blacksmithing. What we have to do is picture Billy now as he's coming into manhood and in his youth, not as this guy, as Uncle Billy, whose image we see everywhere. We need to picture him as this guy. Sarah very kindly sent me a high-res copy of this image, which, you know, most of you may have seen before. This was my first look at Uncle Billy when he was at Drake Well. What was he, in his 40s? In the full bloom of his strength and capabilities. And what I'm completely caught by are his eyes. If those aren't the eyes of somebody who has full command of his craft, who gets his way, and probably had a grandmother who traveled across the Atlantic while she was nursing one baby and pregnant with another. I don't know who that is. I also think those eyes suggest he may have been a bit of a troublemaker. Anyway, that's how we have to think about Billy in the next little section. If his dad Andrew had hoped that Billy would come right back to the farm after his apprenticeship and provide skilled labor, he was probably disappointed. By 16, Billy was making drilling tools for salt wells in the Tarentum area. He then opened a blacksmith shop in Pittsburgh in the 1840s. After that, he and his young family returned to Tarentum in the 1850s, and he specialized in making tools for and drilling salt wells. While Billy was in Pittsburgh, he met and married Jane Powell. She was born in Wales in 1800, and so was his senior by 12 years. Billy and Jane had 7 children, including twin daughters, Adeline and Ellen, some born in Pittsburgh, the last few in Tarentum after the family settled there. Throughout the 1850s, Billy built a solid reputation as an excellent blacksmith, mechanic, and driller. I'm skipping the story of Drake's story, how he searched for a blacksmith and a driller high and low to help him manifest his dream of drilling for oil in Titusville, because you all know that story very, very well. After a few failed attempts, Drake finally teamed up with Billy in early 1859. With the help of his son, James, William, and Samuel, Billy stayed at Tarentum in his blacksmith shop and crafted equipment for the Drake project before leaving for the site in May of 1859.
Hello. Can you hear me?
What?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Robert Gregg.
Uh-huh.
My ancestors lived in Pithole.
Uh-huh.
And the story my father told me was that Willie Smith lived with them in their farmhouse while he was putting together the tooling and drilling the well up there. And we did a little research. The farm was right on top of the hill above Pithole, or southwest of Pithole.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And just west of there was a little church with a cemetery beside it. And we did some research in there. I was living in Titusville at the time. And we found some cemetery stones that had both Gregg and also had Smith names on them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's important or not, but just for your information now, the Greggs later migrated from Pithole down to Grove City. And that's where they settled. There were 5 sons. And then we now have a farm just south of Grove City.
Oh, beautiful.
Just to tie that together a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing we know about Willie Smith was, or what my dad told me, was that he lived with his ancestors there, or my dad's ancestors. And my dad's name was William Smith Gregg.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
I'm not sure where the Smith came from.
Right. I'd love to chase that down, because the information that I got, which is different, but not to say either one is right or wrong, and they may both be right. You know, it was a year's worth of, people moving in and out and setting up this well. But my understanding is that when Billy came to Titusville in the spring of 1859, he brought with him his son, Samuel, when he was just a teenager, and his 24-year-old daughter. He brought Samuel to help because Samuel was learning the trades of smithing and drilling. And also Billy had agreed to throw in Samuel's labor as part of his own contract to work for Drake at the rate of $2.50 a day. So Billy sort of came along as a helper apprentice, but he brought Margaret along so that she could keep house for her father and her brother. Now,
Right.
what I read was, and I'm sure Margaret was thrilled to learn this, that they occupied a partitioned off section of, maybe it's, this house, was it the engine house or a shack nearby, that they were actually living on site until the rest of the family arrived and occupied a house in Titusville.
So I can interject
Yeah.
there.
Super.
So the photo that is up currently, we have listed on that photograph, the caption for that is the Smith residence is on the left. Uncle Billy is in the foreground, seated in the wheelbarrow.
Okay, so it's here.
Yes.
Okay, and my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that this is quite likely his son, and these are his daughters, two of his daughters.
Ooh.
That this one is Margaret. Oh, I lost my, hang on one sec. This is the better picture, which I just love this, of Billy standing, that I'd never seen before yesterday. And supposedly, here's his son in the doorway, wife and daughter seated behind him. Once again-
Actually, one of those girls is Annette Farwell. And I
Okay.
believe we do have identifications for the other. And I'll need to check. I'll
Okay.
let you know
Super.
when I get back to the well on Sunday.
Super. I had about 10 different secondary resources to consult, and I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that just about every one of them had these photos captioned differently. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if the people in the background were not indeed the Smiths. That was simply the caption I got out of one of the early sources. Right, that one. So whether she was keeping house in this building or a nearby house, Billy's 24-year-old daughter, Margaret, did keep house for her dad and her brother until the rest of the family showed up. All I can say is such is the life of an unmarried daughter. The following passages are description about Drake well operation in Uncle Billy's own words, taken from an interview he did for the Titusville Weekly Herald when he was 68, back to this guy, and visiting the town of Titusville in 1880. First is his description made by the reporter. Smith still has the appearance of a hale, hearty man, and although somewhat below middle stature, his broadly built frame indicates that in his earlier days, he was a true son of Vulcan. Don't you just love 19th century prose? I love this. When the reporter asked Billy about any recent illnesses, he replied that he had been ill lately, but, quote, he got some grains of wheat and burned them like coffee and made a sort of drink out of them. And after drinking this a while, I got better and I've never been badly troubled since, end quote. I can't possibly begin to imagine what that tasted like, but Uncle Billy swears it did the trick for him. If you're interested in the detailed interview that Billy gave to that reporter about the sinking of the first well, please do consult a book that I'll comment on later. One interesting bit that I did pick up on, though, and maybe you folks can speak to it because it did confuse me. I always heard and was given to understand that the idea of sinking pipes for the drill to go down through and not get flooded out was Edwin Drake's, that was his brainstorm, and he just had to get Billy to do it. But Billy seemed to remember it like this, and I'm quoting him here. We went to work. I wanted some driving pipe right away, but Mr. Drake thought we could get down without. So I got a 6-foot down, then 18 inches of a second one, and the water came in so fast we had to work knee deep in it. When I drawed the rod out, the water gushed out at a big rate and we had to get out. I saw it was no use trying to get down without a driving pipe. There's another quote from somebody who came to see the well just after the oil was discovered. And excuse me, I just have to. Apparently, I've managed to throw that away. But it seemed to indicate that the workers from the nearby mill came over and were saying that, well, they thought Uncle Billy was crazy for wanting to sink pipe, but he was right. Here he was right all along. So can somebody help me understand, is it understood definitively that it was Drake's idea and Billy's know-how that got it done, or was this really Billy's idea all along?
I think that's still up for debate.
Okay, all right.
Billy was such an experienced driller with all of his salt well experience in Tarentum. I'm a fan of Billy myself.
Oh, I've come to be very, very fond of him. Oh, here I found the quote. Workers from the adjacent mill came to see. Drake said, "Just look what Smith has done." And the mill owner said, "Why, all along we thought Smith was crazy. Look what he's done now." So, well, I'm glad to hear that it's still a mystery, because I thought I was reading around in circles and more thoroughly confused than I generally am. Now I got off track. Okay, back on we go. As you all well know, Drake's well was short-lived. After 1859, Billy remained at the site as a pumper and drilled a few small additional wells. But after the oil boom of the early 60s depressed the price of oil down to 10 cents a barrel, the Drake works were shut down in the fall of 1861. Billy stayed through the winter, then packed up and moved back to his farm in Buffalo Township. Home again, back where he began life, where the Smiths had owned and operated or rented out farmland since 1792. Just listening to you all, I suspect you are more than passingly familiar with the book that I was tempted to quote from, but this session would have run far, far, far too long. Paul Giddens, Pennsylvania Petroleum, 1750 to 1872. There are transcripts of newspaper interviews that Billy, son Samuel, and daughter Margaret gave in later years, recounting tales of their life on site at the well and in the Titusville house that the entire family moved into during drilling. If you really want to feel like you're there, or at least know the Smith family quite well, I can't recommend that book highly enough. I'm certain there are several copies of it in the library up at Drake Museum. In answer to the 1880 reporter's question about his surviving family, by them certainly grown, Billy answered, "I have 3 grown-up sons, James, William, Samuel, and 3 daughters living." And I found this to be interesting. "My youngest daughter died of diphtheria while I was working on the Drake well. And indeed, he did lose one of his daughters in the summer of 1859, which of course sent me to thinking about, did Billy just keep working? How was the rest of the family impacted? These are questions I can't know the answer to. The boys all worked at the Drake well at different times. As an aside, I'll break away from what he's saying and say, To no surprise at all, I mentioned Billy's family married into the Cooper family. Billy's sister, 47-year-old sister Rebecca, died also in 1859 when he was at Drake. She's the one that married into the Cooper family. So during that summer, Billy lost a daughter and a sister, but I guess just kept on working. Rebecca Smith, Billy's sister, married John Ivan Cooper, who was the second generation of Coopers to be born and to come to Winfield. John Ivan was the father of Nancy Jane Cooper, who, if you know anything about Cooper Cabin at all, know that she lived there for 101 years from her birth in 1861 to her death in 1962. So Smith and Coopers somehow managed to touch base once again. The reporter asked Billy, "Where are your sons now?" "William is in Rochester, clerking in a store. James and Samuel live here in Titusville. Samuel works at J.H. Davis planing mill, and James is doing nothing." "And your daughters?" "Two live here in Titusville, one at Northeast." Margaret married Charles Irish. Ellen is married to James Dugan of Titusville, and Adeline, her twin sister, is married to Tobias Williams. As an aside, it turns out that Samuel B. Smith, the son who went with Billy from Tarentum to Drake's Well, later in his life served in the Civil War with the Pennsylvania 6th Heavy Artillery under Colonel Charles Barnes, who happens to be my third great grandfather. I've discovered since coming to Butler that everyone around here is only 2 degrees of separation from my family. But wait, there's more. Lest you think that Billy only had 7 kids, his wife Jane died in 1869, and Billy got married again, twice. He married Mary Fritz in August of 1872. 6 weeks later, she died. Billy married again, and I love the way he described what happens next. "I married a third wife, and on the 15th day of February, she brought me a son, and I called his name General Grant Smith. In 1875, she fetched me another one, and I called him General Washington Smith." They also had a daughter named Minnie May, but apparently Billy didn't think to mention her to the reporter. When Uncle Billy died at age 78 in July of 1890, he left his property to his children, and with the best of luck, I did find his papers of administration. Let me catch up with myself visually here. His papers of administration included, of course, his will. And in it, Billy left children from his first wife, Jane, bequests of anywhere from $5 to $25. He left the sons of wife number 3, George Washington and General Grant Smith, a third of his real estate. He also left a third of his real estate to his stepson, Isabel's son by an earlier marriage. Minnie May got $80, so she made out pretty well. That disparity between the older and younger children getting different amounts in property and cash might have left us speculating about favorites, but it's much more likely that the younger children, not being quite grown yet, had to be provided for, while the children of his first marriage were long since grown and established. Of course, part of the estate, part of Uncle Billy's estate had to go to pay the estate's bills. Any outstanding bills that Billy had left for services or goods that were still on somebody's books. And those included things such as this, which is the bill for his funeral for all of $10. My family's recently paid for a funeral, and I can guarantee you it was infinitely more than $10. Let me get. Here's another bill settled by the estate on part payment of Billy's burial outfit and burial itself. Technology, I love it when it works. In the papers of administration are these letters with money sent to the children, telling them that they had gotten their legacy, $20, $25. And also in the papers of administration are the receipts back from those children, acknowledging that they had received their legacy from their father, William Andrew. What I love best of all, because it's really what interests me the most, is Billy's personal inventory. I'm going to assume that all of you are familiar with personal inventories. Very, very quickly, for those who aren't, starting many centuries ago, the common practice was when somebody died, for a neighbor or someone appointed by the court to go in and list every single solitary thing they owned, the decedent owned, from the land to their tools, and the assessors went through their house and listed every single thing in their house. So this is what Billy left when he died. It wasn't all that much. This is exactly what I would have expected to see in the personal inventory of a man who died in Butler County, probably 1840s or 50s. There just isn't, there are plenty of farming tools. First and foremost, there are always going to be crops, farming tools, and a couple head of livestock. But beyond that, there's really not that much to speak of. Let me get back to my notes here. A couple things I do note in passing. Uncle Billy had grain in several varieties, bushels of wheat, rye, oats, corn, and some buckwheat and potatoes. Also hay, and some turnips. What this tells me is that as of 1890, he was still doing mixed crop agriculture, raising lots of different crops, probably to sustain his own farm and for barter and trade locally. He has not entered the phase that many farmers had entered by 1890, which was the monoculture, single crop, commercial style of farming. So he's still farming as though it was 1840, 1850. You know, not to say there's anything wrong with that. I just find it interesting that he's still engaged in that mixed crop agriculture. Note the most expensive thing that he leaves aside from his land is, as always with these inventories, a couple of horses, a bay mare who was valued at $125, and a gray horse valued at $25. He also had some hogs and a wagon and tools, harrow, plow, sledge, barrow, straw cutter. What I find interesting in 1890 is there's no steam machinery. He's still doing everything by hand. Now, he did rent his property out, so it's possible that the folks who were renting his farm had moved beyond and into steam power farm equipment. But according to what Uncle Billy left behind, he was still, or people he hired to, or his family were still doing farming by hand. Inside, we can see that Billy did not once again leave all that much. Parlor stove, sewing machine, chairs, table and stand, bed and bedding, bureau and clock. He did leave a library of books valued at $5, which means there were quite a number of books, which makes me love Billy all the more. Kettle, dishes, brass kettle, flour chest, and butter churn. Very, 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 very standard items. Nothing that would make you think that this was a noteworthy man at all. However, I don't know if anybody else caught this right away. This actually choked me up a little bit because I'm weird. I'm an historian. Uncle Billy left in his will one lot of blacksmith's tools. Does anybody know where those blacksmith tools ended up? I'm a little bit frustrated because, well, I'm happy for Billy and his heirs, because what usually happened in these circumstances was, after all, local people had 2 years to present bills to the estate, and the executor of the will had 2 years to pay all of those bills out of what was left in the estate. What quite often happened is there wasn't enough cash to pay off the bills, and so all of the items of the decedent were auctioned off at a vendu sale. Everybody from miles around would come, and there would be an auctioneer selling off all of the decedent's possessions. What makes me crazy is quite often the widow got to stand there and see her possessions, her bed, her bedding, her quilt, things that she brought into the marriage auctioned off as well. This didn't happen in Billy's case. There was no vendu sale, which suggests that either the records didn't survive, or that Billy's cash on hand, or what was available through real estate, was able to satisfy all of his debts, and there was no sale. So you think that that lot of blacksmith tools might have gone to family. This is the kind of thing that will keep me up for the next few nights. And so I flip back to you folks who are much more conversant with the history of Billy and the well. Do you know where these tools ended up?
Drake Well Museum has an anvil, a rope knife, which is an oil well tool, and one small tiny set of pliers. And I'll be sure that you get a photo of those. And that's it.
That's it. I mean, what we're looking at right here is the Holy Grail. You know, these are Billy Smith's blacksmith tools. And you know how it goes at the time. I mean, he was buried in an unmarked grave for what, 60 years? So sure, people knew who he was, but who could have guessed that 100 years later, people would be scrambling if only they could get their hands on any of Uncle Billy's blacksmith tools. So I ended my talk with a question, and you've answered it. And it's 7:27. I've run out of steam and anything to say. Does anybody have any questions with what I offered in the second half?
Well, now you're going to have me sleepless nights wondering what happened to Uncle Billy Smith's tools. But, you know, yes, he was famous back then when he passed, but he wasn't a superstar.
Right.
So he was a star, but not a superstar. So I guess his, tools just went into an antique store or were just sold at an auction or something somewhere.
Yeah.
Someone's got them. Someone has them.
Passed down through the family. I mean, all of Billy's kids, no, most of Billy's kids had kids, and they had kids. There are folks are forever calling the Butler County Historical Society and announcing with great pride that they are Cooper descendants. We look at each other and say, of course you are.
Right.
the Coopers married early and often and got busy. The Smiths as well left hundreds and hundreds of descendants. I would say if you're not related to a Cooper, you're related to a Smith.
Do you have,
So there were
can you hear
lots and
me?
lot. I'm sorry.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Do you have any idea where Willie is buried?
Oh yes, he's with the Coopers.
That he is.
And
Where at?
indeed he is in what some people call it the Pape Cemetery, some people call it the Cooper Cemetery. It is at the corner of Route, oh forgive me, I'm a Pittsburgher, 356 and Cooper Road, which is where Cooper Cabin is located. It's right there on the corner, and in
Okay,
19
so he's back in near the tournament. He's back in
No.
southern Butler County.
he's about 20 minutes southeast of Butler itself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's Winfield Township.
Yeah. right.
You know, which is not all that far from Toronto, even
Well, I
though
was just
Toronto's.
curious of whether he was down there or up near Pithole.
Nope, he's up right near where he was born and raised.
There is a small cemetery up there, right close to where he lived, and up on top of the hill above the Drake Well.
Well, we've got him with the Coopers, and you're very much mistaken if you think I'm not going to capitalize on that for all it's worth. You know, being a good executive director, I will certainly find a way to monetize that fact.
There you go.
But I understand it was unmarked grave for a very long time, and shoot, I had pictures in another folder
That's all right. That was just curious.
in 1952. Some members of the oil industry erected a very, very fine, very tall monument to Billy. And it's got a gorgeous bas-relief of Drake Well on the side of it, and a lovely inscription. So, you know, in the summer, come on down, visit Cooper Cabin and visit Uncle Billy while you're down here.
Well, that
Yeah.
little cemetery that I told you about on top of the hill down there, it's right across from what used to be a drive-in theater. I forget what it is now. I lived up there back in 61, 62. And my youngest son, or actually was my oldest son, but he wasn't very old at that point. But he's been a photographer all his life. And he has pictures of that cemetery. Everybody's in it, I think.
Wow.
But,
Does he still have those images?
he probably does, yes. He never throws anything away. I got file cabinets full of them.
Oh God. True historians.
Yeah.
In that book I mentioned, somewhere between pages 72 and 80, Billy is asked what he did with the tools he made for Drake Well, and he does. Oh yeah. Have you any of the tools in your possession used on the Drake Well? Yes, I have the rope socket, sinker bar, jars, temper screw, reamer, 1 second size bit, and a center bit, sand pumps, wrenches, and clamps. So as of 1880, he still had all of those. And I did come across a bit of a controversy about anvils and which one is in the museum there, but I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go there. I think that's dangerous turf. So, well, you've all been very kind. As you can tell, I am brand new to this subject, but I'm now very, very much interested in it. I've developed a real fondness for Uncle Billy, and even though I'm not, I will never get really excited about the technical or business aspects of drilling. I think his is a fascinating story. His family's is a fascinating story.
We do have one question, Jen, and that is the author and the name of the book that you just quoted.
Yep. Yep. Okay, it is. Commissioned by PHMC, of course.
Yep.
Pennsylvania Petroleum, 1750 through 1872, a documentary history. Compiled and edited by Paul H. Giddens, Giddens. And at the time, in 1947, he was the curator at Drakewell Museum. Okay. So it's a treasure trove. I mean, you really can hear Billy and 3 of his children, actually, and folks who lived all around Titusville, speaking in first person about what they remembered of the experience in the town. Yeah, I'm glad the Historical Society owns it. Anybody else?
There is maps up there at the Historical Society, or at least there were at Drake's Well. They had maps there that showed the property that Willie lived on and that my ancestors lived on.
Here at this Historical Society?
No,
Oh,
No,
at
at the well.
Drake. At Drakewell, okay.
At Drake's Well.
it's on the
Okay.
wall right behind the door when you go in.
Used to be on the wall right there where you go into the door into the museum.
Well, now that we're starting to clear COVID, maybe in the not too distant future, I can actually get up there.
Oh, it's not far. I lived there when I was pretty young. I drove back and forth every other week. So
Yeah, just up the road. We're Western
Yeah.
Pennsylvanians. It's just up the road.
Yep. Could you give me the title of that book again?
The title is Pennsylvania Petroleum, 1750 to 1872, edited by Paul H. Giddens. I have to believe that there are several copies at Drakewell Museum.
Yes.
Yep, there definitely are. It's a great source.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Thank you for your help.
All right. Do we have any more questions for Jen? Oh, I want to
Tell her how interesting.
I want to thank everybody for attending this evening's program. If you have any further questions or comments about tonight's program, please feel free to email me, and my email address is sargoodman@pa.gov, and I'll put that in the comments here. And I can forward the questions on to Sue Bates, who is our curator here, or to Jen to help answer those questions, or if I can answer them, I will do that myself. Again, thank you so much, Jen, for your insight and digging into the social aspect of Uncle Billy. You know, for me, I know the technical side of Uncle Billy, but to really dig deeper into him is kind of fascinating. I mean, we only talk about what he does here at the well, but and I knew a little bit about his family history, but to just hear you say again that he had 3 wives, that really, I was like, wow, okay, yeah.
And his third wife fetched him up some sons.
Yes, fetched him
Like
up. I mean,
It's like
and I
she went out to the cabbage patch and got him a boy.
And I love his sons' names. I think those are great names
Aren't those a
that they
scream?
chose. But it was a very common thing back then to name them after
Sure.
the presidents and things. But
Sure.
that really kind of made me like Uncle Billy all the more. And when we were talking about the drive pipe, you know, there's the legend that when I first came to Drakewell, it was, oh, that Colonel Drake took off his top hat and looked at it and thought of the drive pipe or the casing pipe. But, you know, I'm kind of a fan of Billy. I mean, Billy was doing this stuff before that. So, you know, but the legend, the little.
I don't know if any, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you,
That's all
Sarah.
right. it's nice to think of that legend of him taking off his hat, looking at his hat and thinking that,
That's nice. That's
Yeah,
nice.
it's
George
nice.
Washington chopped down a cherry tree.
Yep, exactly.
While doing research, I got to see the most, I don't know what to call it. It's interesting, but certainly dated film. I'm sure you're well aware of it. It's about a half-hour industrial film, Born in Freedom.
Yes, we do play that at the museum upon special request.
Oh God, I mean, it was fascinating. It was like my introduction to
Yep,
what went on up there. But the cast, Vincent Price as
Yeah.
Edwin Drake,
yep,
and one of the drilling crew. He was, you see an actor and think, who is that guy? Who is that guy? He was the captain on Gilligan's Island.
yep. You got it.
It's a great film.
It is a great film. Well, again, Jen, thank you so much
Sure.
for joining us this evening. It was
My pleasure.
wonderful learning more. Look forward to working with you to dive deeper into William Smith and to maybe find out a little more. And as we find out more, we'll share with you, and please share with us. I want to
Absolutely.
invite everybody back next week to our next session and our last session of Winter Academy, which will be on the 17th. I think, yep, 17th, had to double check that. And it will be presented by Natalie, who is from the National Energy Technology Lab. And she's going to talk about a project that was done up here in the oil region on abandoned wells and the different technologies that they used to discover the abandoned wells and what they did. And I'm really looking forward to it. She's going to talk about drones and ground penetrating radar and all of this great stuff. And it's really fascinating. And if any of you follow us, she was actually supposed to present back in March of 2020, but unfortunately we had to cancel the program due to the pandemic. So it's wonderful that we're able to have her now present as part of this program. So I invite you all back. If you want more information on this presentation tonight also, I will be editing the footage of this presentation tomorrow. And hopefully, if technology is my friend, which I really hope it is, I will get this video posted onto our YouTube channel, which is Drakewell Museum and Park. So subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch this program again in case you missed something. So again, thank you, Jen. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Good night, everybody.
And look forward to seeing you all next week. So thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks, Sarah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.